A new report says the President of the United States shared highly classified information with Russia's top foreign diplomats, a move that could compromise a secret intelligence agreement. I'm Elaine Quijano, and this is Red and Blue. Ahead on the program, a Republican member of the Senate Judiciary Committee says he may be open to an independent Russia investigation to help heal the erosion of public trust in the nation. And the president is moving quickly to replace the FBI director he fired. But sources tell CBS News that his growing anger at key administration members could mean a drastic reshaping of his West Wing team. But first, the White House is denying a Washington Post report that President Trump shared highly classified information with Russia's foreign minister and ambassador at the White House last week. According to the Post, President Trump shared details about an ISIS threat relating to the use of laptop computers on aircraft. Those details came through a sensitive intelligence sharing agreement with a U.S. partner. The Post says the most potentially damaging detail shared is this: the name of the ISIS-held city where the threat was detected. One source told the Post that President Trump revealed more information to the Russian ambassador than we have shared with our own allies. U.S. reporters were not permitted in that White House meeting, which happened last Wednesday. The photos we have are from a Russian government photographer. A former U.S. intelligence official tells CBS News, quote, something inappropriate was discussed. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster pushed back on the story in a brief statement Monday night.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I just have a brief statement for the record. There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our two countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
You heard McMaster say President Trump did not discuss intelligence sources or methods. He also said the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. But the Washington Post story makes no such claim. And as you saw, McMaster did not take questions. Lawmakers from both parties said Monday night they were concerned about the report.
It's disturbing, and let's find out what the details are, whether it actually happened or not. We just have an initial report, so it's very difficult to comment until we get all the facts here. I'm not going to jump to any conclusion until we get the facts, as much as I trust the Washington Post, unimpeachable source.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's accurate or not. If it's accurate, it'd be troubling. All I can say is that I've seen other stories in the Washington Post, which is a fine newspaper, about what Comey allegedly asked of Burr, and I didn't buy it. That didn't pan out to be true. So I don't know. I don't know if it's accurate. It'd be troubling. I have no idea.
That's really shocking, and there's obviously going to be a lot more work for us this week. It's a reminder that the president, I think, somewhat recklessly chose to welcome the foreign minister of Russia, the ambassador of Russia, into an Oval Office meeting with reporters who apparently hadn't been cleared for that. The suggestion that he might have shared highly classified information inappropriately with the Russian foreign minister is deeply troubling, particularly at a time when we have so many other challenges facing us internationally and domestically.
Senator Mark Warner, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, tweeted, "If true, this is a slap in the face to the intel community. Risking sources and methods is inexcusable, particularly with the Russians." Tennessee Republican Senator Bob Corker was notably critical of the White House, saying, "Obviously, they are in a downward spiral right now and have got to figure out a way to come to grips with all that's happening." Earlier, I spoke with CBS News political contributor and Washington Post political reporter Ed O'Keefe. For more details on this report, Ed O'Keefe is a CBSN political contributor and congressional reporter for The Washington Post, and he joins me now. Ed, what more have we learned following your paper's initial report?
Well, at this point, Elaine, we're really tracking the political response. This published just as senators were taking a procedural vote in the late afternoon, and many of them professed they had only heard the top-line details, but they're all, at this point, have gone back and read it, and they're not happy with what they're hearing. Several saying it's disturbing. One even said it was terrifying. Others saying that the Trump administration and the president himself is going to have to really explain what went on here. You know, what's funny for a lot of us who've been covering this, and Elaine, I know you can probably sympathize with this idea. It's like what we dealt with last week with the FBI director, just the same sort of churn and disbelief and response and suppressed annoyance among Republicans and growing concern among Democrats about what went on here and why the president decided to do what he did. The White House is denying it. I can tell you my colleagues who broke this story stand by the reporting and say that, you know, that everything that they have reported, and I know having sort of tracked it throughout the day here, is solid and true, and it's going to ripple across Washington and the world in the coming days. Right, and even as your reporters are standing by their reporting, we have a tweet from Donald Trump Jr. saying, amazing, who wants to take bets that there aren't retractions? But I want to ask you about the lawmakers here recourse. This is the Trump Jr. tweet, by the way. Amazing, who wants to take bets that there aren't retractions? Realistically, what kind of leverage do lawmakers really have when it comes to trying to get some clarity from this White House? Well, at this point, remember, you have an ongoing House and Senate Intelligence Committee's investigations into Russia's meddling in the U.S. elections last year. This would seemingly be seen as a separate matter unless we see that there are connections between that investigation and what the president did in this meeting last week with Russian officials in the Oval Office. What lawmakers can push for is a further explanation from the president, details about who else was in the room, and possibly figure out then through those people what exactly was shared, in what matter, and what was it that compelled White House officials to apparently call the CIA director, the head of the NSA, and alert them to what had happened. That'll be a matter for the Intelligence Committee. It could become a matter for the Foreign Relations Committee as well. They don't have subpoena power, but they certainly could get involved if relations with a key ally overseas, whichever one it is, have been compromised by the president's decision to share this information. So really what they can do here is apply political pressure to get the president to give an explanation. In limited circumstances, congressional committees could issue subpoenas to learn more about what the president did here. But it's important to point out, while it would be a crime, potentially, and certainly against the rules for most government officials to share this information, it is not considered so for the president himself. Whoever the president is has the power to declassify information if it's classified and sensitive. Ed O'Keefe in Washington for us. Ed, thanks a lot. Take care, Elaine. Let's bring in Michael Graham and Katie Glick in our Washington bureau. Michael is creative director at Media DC, and Katie is a senior political correspondent for McClatchy DC. All right, a lot to get to, and I want to start off by asking you both this question. What are the threads you're seeing in the response to this story so far? Katie, let me start with you.
Sure, great to be with you. What I think is significant about what is developing as we speak is that in contrast to other controversies that the White House has confronted, this time around we really are seeing more Republicans being willing to openly question the accounts coming out of the White House, or at a minimum saying that they want more answers. And you're seeing that from people who maybe typically do tend to be a little bit more in lockstep with the White House line. And so, you know, as we speak, we are seeing Republicans coming out saying that they want more answers and being pretty open about why they feel that this report is troubling in a way that we don't always see in other Washington controversies.
What about you, Michael?
Well, when you can hear the screams of the people who were thrown under the bus last week, it reminds you not to step out in front of the moving vehicle this week. So Republicans have already seen how stories change, how there's no, you just can't count on the information that you're getting. And so it's all wait and see. I also do think, and I know that there are Trump supporters who want this to be said, we've seen stories in the past where people jump to conclusions, the worst case scenario, because there are a lot of people in the press who don't like Trump. And so we may find out more about the story. I'm not saying it's true, not true. I'm just simply saying that should be added to the conversation. But at the same time, I have yet to hear from a single Republican. I was talking to a Republican activist right before he came on the set. And I said, do you have any doubt that Donald Trump would do this? And nobody is denying that, and that's a problem.
Yeah. What did each of you hear in Senator Bob Corker's comment that the White House is in, quote, a downward spiral right now? Katie, let me start with you.
Sure. I mean, that was a very pointed remark from someone who in the past has had a very good relationship with the White House. You know, if you recall, of course, he was someone who at one point was discussed as in the running for a top administration post. And so certainly significant to have a Republican lawmaker from a conservative state come out there and offer that pretty blunt assessment of where he sees the White House in terms of the situation they're dealing with right now. And so I think the key to watch there is how many other Republicans come out and are willing to sort of voice some more of that skepticism.
Yeah, Michael, what do you think? That was a pretty harsh assessment there.
It's not nearly as harsh as the assessments that our reporters at the Weekly Standard and the Washington Examiner are getting off the record. They come back from Capitol Hill and their eyebrows are on fire. Republicans are terrified because nobody knows what to, I mean, think about this. Somewhere there is an intelligence professional who's supposed to take this information to the President of the United States who wonders, should I give this information to the President of the United States? Because you don't know what the guy is going to do with it. You can talk about the staff and flipping the staff. Everybody knows where the problem starts. And it starts behind the desk in the Oval Office.
So on that point, let's put up this quote from a follow-up story Politico published Monday night. Quote, one advisor who often speaks to the president said the conversation was likely freewheeling in the Oval Office and he probably wanted to impress the officials. So Michael, you touched on this a moment ago, but where does this incident fit into other off-script moments that we have seen?
This is class. I mean, once again, nobody has a problem believing it. Let me tell you, when I go back and tell Vlad, I got this covered. I got this amazing intel. And somewhere in the Middle East, in Israel or Jordan, someone's going, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. And the United States is going to have to deal with this because whatever that source was and whatever that intelligence plan was and whatever flow information we have, that country's not going to keep giving it to us. That would be crazy. And it goes back to them having the same problem that a lot of Americans have right now. Is Donald Trump a responsible enough person to handle this information?
Yeah, Katie, as several probes move forward into Russian election interference and possible collusion between Trump associates and Russia, what questions do you think this story adds?
Well, it's the latest fuel to this broader fire that kind of continues to engulf the White House as it relates to Russia. This is an issue that just has not gone away for the White House, for this administration. It's something that, of course, upsets many of the Trump administration's allies, and in fact, many people on Capitol Hill. They feel that every time that they are making progress legislatively or politically, there is another shoe to drop as it relates to these investigations and then now reports of this conversation. So, you know, certainly, and Ed spoke to this earlier, this might be separate from the investigations that are ongoing, but it does get back to that bigger question of contacts with Russia, the optics of that, which has continued to be a persistent political problem for the White House so far.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, it would seem there would be an addition of smoke to this situation. Not sure if there's fire, like you and I have talked about so many times before on this program. However, it would seem at this point, when you saw the National Security Advisor out there in that very hastily thrown together, it's not even a Q&A session. You can't even call it a press conference, but just that very brief statement after he'd already given one written statement, but punctuating that with an on-camera appearance, it would certainly seem to add some more smoke.
And see, I actually disagree. If anything, this feeds the narrative that Donald Trump is not in a fair, you know, your choice is sinister or stupid. I'm not betting on sinister. If you are really in collusion with Russians, you're not doing this out in the open. But Donald Trump couldn't collude a bunch of, you know, teenage boys to surf internet porn. I mean, this is just, he is there. He is Trump. And I think this really it adds another brick to the wall of whatever Trump was doing, he was not up to anything nefarious. Was he having meetings, or did he hire people who had crummy connections? Sure. What were the Russians doing in the Oval Office to begin with? We should be punishing them for interfering with our election, regardless of how it came out. But that's not Trump. Trump is transparently Trump. And so that's why I fall on the side of not nefarious.
All right. Well, let's turn to this possible White House senior staff shakeup. Here's what Chief White House Correspondent Major Garrett reported on Monday.
The first thing our audience needs to know is since Inauguration Day, talk of staff shakeups, rivalries, intrigue has been constant here at the White House. And at one time or another, White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus was mentioned as someone who could get fired. So could White House counsel Don McGahn and senior strategist Steve Bannon. And all are still here. And yet, this time it does feel more real. The president's frustrations about the direction of his administration are real, and he's considering staff shakeups of a significant magnitude. What that really means this week, probably, though, is Sean Spicer and the communications director, Mike Dubke, could be the ones under the most scrutiny. Why? Because there is a pervasive sense at this White House that though President Trump set the firing of James Comey, the former FBI director, in motion in an awkward way, his communication staff compounded that, made matters worse as the week went on. And if those two figures, Sean Spicer and Mike Dubke, don't convince the president this week that they can solve the problems that they in part created for this White House, they may find themselves on the outside looking in.
So, Katie, help us understand the implications of this beyond palace intrigue. Why should the American people care about this potential shakeup?
Sure. Well, and just quickly to a point that was just raised, of course, if these two are going to be under the microscope, then they are going to have even more ample opportunity to sort of show what they can do this week, should they choose to engage with the press again, just given how big this this story that we were just discussing is. But, you know, in terms of the broader question of why does this palace intrigue matter to the American people, you know, probably on a day-to-day basis, this is not the top issue that voters are thinking about. They're thinking about health care, they're thinking about taxes, they're thinking about the economy, but it does matter in terms of the direction that the White House is going in. And, you know, we know that there's different thinking and different camps within the White House who have maybe some different and competing views at times about the direction that the administration should go. So who's in charge and who's calling the shots is certainly significant on that front.
At the same time, Michael, I would imagine that Trump supporters don't care much about this kind of thing, that it doesn't make a difference at all.
Well, they want to see his results, and I think I've talked to people who've said that they're bothered by the performance of basically the team. In other words, they want to see things get done. You already had the failure of the Obamacare vote, and then they'd come back and do it again, and they were thrilled that they finally got it done, but didn't build a lot of confidence. And now you've got the tax reform plan moving forward, and does Steve Mnuchin and his team, do they have the horses who can pull this through? If President Trump gets results, his voters are going to largely be happy. But at the same time, this mishandling intelligence after the criticism that Hillary Clinton deservedly received for her behavior, I think this is one that's going to be harder to slough off for a lot of Trump supporters.
It'll be interesting to watch, because in past administrations what you'd see is pressure being applied from that briefing room podium, right, Katie, to try and exert pressure on lawmakers to come over to your side, but we haven't really seen that briefing room podium used in that way necessarily.
Sure, and certainly not tonight. No opportunity yet to really ask questions and push forward on this front. You know, certainly to the question of where are his supporters on this. I mean, there's no question that he has a rock-solid group of supporters who, and if you take a look at how this story is playing on some websites that are certainly that tend to be supportive of the administration, you'll see that so far people who tend to be supportive of him typically certainly are, but you know, for other Republican lawmakers who often are there, the fact that they are now starting to more publicly ask questions, maybe acknowledge a little bit more space, I think is significant.
All right, Michael Graham and Katie Glick in Washington, thank you both. Really appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
With FBI Chief James Comey out of the picture, more lawmakers are calling for an independent prosecutor to look into potential Trump-Russia ties. Coming up, Republican Senator Ben Sasse explains why he is considering supporting the move and why he says Comey's firing exacerbates the erosion of public trust. Plus, Hillary Clinton has a new plan to step back into politics. More on her new political group when we return. You're watching CBSN. Dozens of protesters gathered outside a Seattle courthouse Monday afternoon, demonstrating against President Trump's revised travel ban. The protesters were urging a three-judge panel hearing arguments on the president's executive order to declare it unconstitutional. That executive order seeks to limit the travel of people from 6 predominantly Muslim countries to the U.S. The federal appeals court is currently deciding whether to uphold a decision by a Hawaii judge to stop the ban from taking effect. Lawyers for the administration argue the measure is vital to national security. Those arguing against the order say it's discriminatory. The president's revised travel ban seeks to temporarily ban refugees from Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. The judges in Monday's hearing gave no indication about when they might issue their final ruling. In response to a question about James Comey's firing, Republican Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska said we are, quote, in the midst of a civilization-warping crisis of public trust. So where do we go from here? Senator Sasse is also the author of the new book, The Vanishing American Adult, and we are pleased to have Senator Sasse with us now. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
A lot to talk about with your book, but also a lot to talk about in Washington. So let's talk about that first.
Okay.
Whose job is it, you think, to fix that crisis in public trust that you speak of?
Eisenhower would say all of us. Eisenhower talked regularly about how all Americans should see themselves as having a part-time calling as a politician. We shouldn't have full-time politicians. People shouldn't move to Washington, D.C. and think that that's the center of the world. So people should serve for a term in office and go back home. But every American voter and citizen has a responsibility to pass on the meaning of the republic to the next generation. And so public trust should be all of us saying Washington can't fix everything. It should fix a small number of truly urgent national things. And we should do that with transparency and esprit de corps that says, hey, just because you and I might differ with each other on a policy, we shouldn't view that as the line between good and evil. Let's decide what we agree on as a civic narrative about our nation first, then let's haggle over policy.
I want to get your thoughts on specific things that are happening and set to happen this week. Deputy Attorney General, as you know, Rod Rosenstein, is set to brief the full Senate on Director Comey's firing on Thursday. What are the questions that you hope to get answered at that hearing?
So I'm the chairman of the Oversight Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee, so I've been in touch with the Deputy Attorney General since the first hours after this was happening, and he's now going to testify before all of us, and that's an oath-like ceremony. I want to understand more about the timing of his arrival in his job as DAG. The Deputy Attorney General tends to be the one to whom all law enforcement official agencies directly report, so it's an odd structure inside the Department of Justice, and the whys of that structure are really important. The Attorney General is a political appointee of the president. The director of the FBI is typically a 10-year term. Why? Because we want to insulate those investigative functions further from politics. We've got an Article 1 branch, the legislature, Article 2, the executive, Article 3, the judiciary, but even inside the executive branch, we want to insulate the bureau. And so the DAG, the Deputy Attorney General, has this job of being over the FBI. I want to understand a little bit more about how we got to the place that he wrote this memo. What was he asked for it? How was he asked for it? Why was he asked for it? When was he asked for it? How does that relate to the White House's story about the president's decision to terminate Jim Comey?
Because your questions have to do not with the power and the ability of the president to fire the FBI director, but the timing and why now.
Right. I mean, reasonable people can differ about how the FBI executed its complicated job last year during the unprecedented complexities of the 2016 cycle. I think that Jim Comey is a very honorable public servant. He would never take a bribe till the end of time. He's a special public servant, and yet I think he made some mistakes during the 2016 2016 cycle. Reasonable people can argue about those mistakes. However, to be fired in the midst of an investigation of the president's campaign associates and his organization, that doesn't do anything to restore public trust. It exacerbates the erosion of trust, and we should all be concerned about that, regardless of who you supported in the presidential election.
As you know, Senator, the president tweeted on Friday, James Comey better hope there are no tapes of our conversations before he starts leaking to the press. That was the exact tweet by the president. Are you satisfied that there has been enough clarity regarding whether or not conversations in the Oval Office have been recorded or are being recorded?
No, I don't know how anybody could be satisfied about that tweet. I mean, I think it makes all Americans kind of ache, because one of two things are ultimately true. Either there are tapes and recordings of conversations in the Oval Office, or there aren't, and we pretended there were, and both of those are kind of crazy. Like, I mean, it's not okay to be taping things against law and against federal records, federal presidential records preservation acts. On the other hand, if there were no tapes, why are we seemingly tweeting threats? I think the whole thing is really uncomfortable for everybody, and I think the president has a duty to explain to the American people what the heck that tweet meant.
Right, because White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer has been asked a number of times about that tweet and about whether or not there are recordings of conversations in the Oval Office, and he has just said that the president, there's nothing further to add. He's got nothing further to add, that the president's tweet speaks for itself. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think that everybody in public life has a responsibility to say, hey, in our republic, the 320 million Americans, they rule. The power is with the people. The government has a limited set of enumerated powers, but they come from the people, and the people delegate those responsibilities to their representatives for a short time, but ultimately the authority remains with the people. The people need to understand what the heck stuff like that means, and I think that everybody in public life has a duty to try to explain themselves and their actions to the public.
Meantime, all of this is happening against the backdrop of the president trying to go forward with a legislative agenda. We know healthcare has been top of mind for the president. Also, tax reform has been something Republicans have talked about. What do you think all of this is doing to the president's legislative agenda?
Well, the president's only been in office for, 120 days, and this whole 100-day concept is kind of silly. FDR created the 100-day agenda as a way to empower himself in 1932-33 to try to force an urgency during an obviously urgent time during the Great Depression. But it's not really helpful to think in terms of 100 days. But when you do look at the beginning of an administration, I think we can unbundle a lot of the president's actions and praise him on some things. Other things we could ask lots of hard questions. But Neil Gorsuch, great nominee to the court that the president picked, a guy who believes that the job of the judiciary is to ultimately apply the Constitution to particular circumstances, not to try to be a super legislator. So I praise the president for picks like Neil Gorsuch. In other domains, it's hard to have clarity about a legislative agenda when there are lots and lots of distractions. Washington is not an urgent place. That's one of the things the American people were signaling last November. They wanted Washington to be more urgent about big things. Those should be things like, in my view, replacing Obamacare with a kind of health care plan that helps people, helps American families have an insurance policy that goes with them across job and geographic change. We should be getting that kind of work done, and right now DC's kind of wrapped around the axle.
Well, in an interview with NBC last week, the president said if Russia hacked or had anything to do with interfering in the 2016 election, he wanted to get to the bottom of it. Every intelligence agency, even some members of the president's own cabinet, have agreed that Russia did interfere with the election, yet the president remains skeptical. How does that affect public trust in our institutions?
Well, that's a big problem, right? Because right now when we talk about Russia, everybody looks back at it as the 2016 cycle, and it's sort of a shirts and skins exercise. Are you a Republican or a Democrat? Did you vote for this candidate or that candidate? And we hear the Russia investigation through the lenses of last year's election. I'm concerned about that, but I'm frankly far more concerned about 2018 and 2020, because what Russia does next is going to be a lot more sophisticated than what they did the last time. They want to sow seeds of distrust and doubt among us. They're trying to exacerbate this crisis of public trust. And frankly, the technology of cyber warfare is accelerating really rapidly. And what the Russians are going to do next is leak lots of information, credit card records, phone records on public officials, and they might be 97 or 98 or 99% true, and then they'll seed it with 1 or 2 or 3% fabrication so that you did travel to City X on this date and City Y on that date, but really, did you make all these illicit purchases at such and such establishment in a city at a certain time? And that kind of stuff should concern all of us without regard to our partisanship, and I wish the president would take more of a long-term view about the kinds of challenges we're actually going to face from Russia going forward.
Should there be an independent investigation?
I haven't called for one at this stage because I think we need to restore trust in our institutions, and if you do that today, I'm open to that conversation going forward, but if you do that today, what you really do is you offer a no confidence vote in the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I think there's still real possibility that that institution can make a difference. Richard Burr, the Republican from North Carolina, Mark Warner, the Democrat from Virginia, they actually trust each other and they work well together on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and I want that investigation to go forth. If that thing ultimately falls apart, I'd be very open to that next conversation, but right now what I'd like to do is have the people believe that some of our extant institutions can work.
And if the president remains skeptical and continues to publicly express skepticism about Russian interference with our election, what is the message being sent to Russia for future elections?
Yeah, I don't understand what the president's goals are with regard to Russia. Here's the fact. We know that Russia did interfere in our election. We know that Russia did try to build relationships with all sorts of people. We don't know how far that went inside the Trump organization or the Trump campaign or particular names that have been mentioned. If the president has concern for the public trust and the civic agreement and the harmony of American Union 5 and 10 years in the future, he should be thinking about that and leading us forward on those kinds of topics today. It's hard to understand really how he prioritizes at the present time.
All right, Senator Ben Sasse, thank you so much. I know you're staying with us here. We are going to take a quick break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk to the senator about his new book and what he calls our unprecedented coming-of-age crisis. Stay with us. I'm joined again by Senator Ben Sasse of Nebraska. So, Senator, your new book is called The Vanishing American Adult. And in it, you say that you believe the United States is in the midst of an unprecedented coming-of-age crisis. What do you mean by that?
Too many of our kids are stuck in this category that I call perpetual adolescence. And this book is not about assigning blame. It's 2/3 constructive. It's 1/3 kind of stage setting. But if we were going to assign blame, it's about us, the parents and the grandparents, who are not doing enough to help our kids understand that scar tissue is something to be celebrated. Developing a work ethic, it often stinks and aches and is painful at the time you're going through it, but it makes you tougher. Scar tissue is the basis of future character. And we're not having those conversations with our kids, and that's kind of a unique thing in human history.
One of the things you talk about in your book is recent graduates moving home after college. What's wrong with that?
So there's nothing wrong with intentionally having a multi-generational household. I think there's a lot of great stuff about that. As a father of 3 little kids, I think back, if we'd have had a mother-in-law or a mother and a father-in-law around at times when the kid number 2 came and we're exhausted in the middle of the night, there's a lot to be celebrated about that intentionality. What's happening now, though, is not intentional. It's sort of passive drift back into the nest. The number 1 address for kids after they graduate college now is moving back into mom and dad's basement. Some of that is declining economic opportunity over the last 10 and 15 years. But most of it is more closely connected to the fact that we've raised our kids insulated from work. They've grown up sort of being protected from work instead of being taught that there's freedom to be found in finding meaning in work, not avoiding work. And right now, production and consumption are categories that most of them don't really experience when they're 12 and 14 and 16, the way most people in human history past would have.
But as you noted, economic conditions have played a role in that decision, because I know, covering after the Great Recession, a number of folks who said we'd want to go out, and young people who had hoped to follow in the footsteps of their parents and grandparents and, you know, buy the house and get to a place of self-sufficiency, but the economic conditions simply didn't allow that.
Absolutely. That's a big part of the current moment we're at. But this story is more like the last 20 or 30 years and the next 50 to 100 years. Because what's happening now is a shortening in the duration of an average job in ways that's never happened before in human history. Hunter-gatherers and settled agrarian farmers, they didn't pick jobs. They just became 10 and 12 and 14 and did more of what grandma and grandpa had done. There was no job choice. At industrialization, there was job choice kind of in a mass way for the first time in human history, but you did it once. 15 or 20 years old, you go out and you take a job and you have it till death or retirement. Our kids today are going to have to pick a new job when they're 40 and 45 and 50 and 55 because their jobs are going to evaporate because of technology. They're going to have to be more resilient than the generations coming before them, and in a way we're bubble wrapping them more at exactly the same time where we should want to be helping them toughen up in a way that prepares for the unprecedented opportunities but also scary disruptions of the new economy.
Well, let's talk more about this perpetual adolescence that you speak of. You say kids don't know what an adult is anymore, that for older generations it is, quote, our fault more than it is theirs that we ended up here. Is this a problem that schools need to fix, parents need to fix, or is this up to every individual?
So it's all of the above, though I think we expect more out of schools than schools can possibly deliver on. We put a huge burden on schools, and in a way we need to understand that schooling is just one of many tools in life, and right now we've come to a place where we sort of drift where our kids think that grade promotion through school is their main work, and then outside of the school day it's a time for consumption. That's a little bit odd historically. Our kids, as you and I were talking during the break, are 15, 13, and 6, and last year we like to work them. We think it's good for them. Right. And so last year we shipped off our then 14-year-old to a cattle ranch in the middle of Nebraska and had her help deliver baby cows for a month. And in Nebraska in March, when baby cows are being born, it's often 0 and below. It's tough. At midnight and 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., you got to be out there making sure they don't get frostbite and tag a baby. And a baby cow's between 50 and 120 pounds when born. And you need to hook it back up with mama if they get separated out in the field. And it stinks. It's miserable work.
Sounds like tough love, Senator.
It's tough love. And my daughter knew that it was suffering, and she also knew it was making her tougher. She didn't like that she got rubber gloves that went up to her shoulder. She didn't know she might lose a watch in there delivering a baby cow. And yet she was texting me all these things that basically were her screaming out, you know what, I think I'm growing up. I turned them into tweets because it was just great stuff. Hashtag from the ranch. And I'm tweeting out my daughter's coming of age work experience. And people all over the political spectrum in Nebraska are calling me saying, how can my kids suffer too? What's that rancher's phone number? My kid's playing video games 7 hours a day. I want to ship them to the ranch. Everywhere I went in Nebraska for about 2 months after that, nobody wanted to talk politics. They wanted to talk parenting.
And what does she think about it now?
Oh, she looks back on it fondly. She's proud, right? I mean, in Nebraska, you can drive when you're 14, so she had already learned how to drive, but she didn't know how to drive a stick, and she got to learn to drive a pickup out there, and all these ranch dogs start hopping on her four-wheeler with her in the middle of the night, and she has real responsibility in the world. These cows who could be in duress during labor, they needed her. She was important. She was adding value in the world. Now when she eats a steak, there's a sort of special swelling of pride in her chest that she was part of bringing about that steak.
Yeah, there's a connection to where food comes from and the work involved in that. Well, so this book, bottom line, is not a traditional policy book.
No.
Why not?
Well, I mean, I think the most important things that unite us as a people are pre-governmental, right? There's so much stuff about America, the beating heart of the First Amendment, free speech, press, religion, assembly, protest, all that's way before partisan differences between Republicans and Democrats, and we don't celebrate that stuff enough. And so the book is 100% not about politics. It's 99% not about policy, but it's about a whole bunch of important American communal and civic stuff. But right now we're hollowing out local communities and mediating institutions, and our national conversations are increasingly about politics. And there's a big missing space in there about people around a dinner table wrestling with what do we want for our kids, and I wanted to help bring those conversations more into full view for a lot of parents and grandparents and neighbors who I think want to have it.
All right. Well, The Vanishing American Adult comes out on Tuesday. Senator Ben Sasse from Nebraska. Thanks so much, Senator. I hope you come back sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Well, here's a look at some of the headlines you'll be talking about on Tuesday. The Washington Post reports the Puerto Rican government's bank has reached a liquidation deal with its creditors. This deal reportedly lets the debt-laden U.S. territory avoid bankruptcy. It still has to be formally approved by creditors, a financial oversight board, and the U.S. District Court of Puerto Rico. The New York Times reports French President Macron and German Prime Minister Merkel have a new pledge for Europe. After beating out his nationalist opponent, Macron traveled to Berlin Monday to declare with Merkel that they are determined to save European unity. Merkel, however, reportedly did not rule out treaty changes during their meeting. And Reuters reports President Trump himself has a big meeting with a foreign leader. Mr. Trump is meeting with Turkish President Erdogan on Tuesday in Washington. This comes just a week after President Erdogan called for the U.S. not to arm Kurdish forces fighting ISIS in Syria. Erdogan is reportedly hoping to change the president's mind on that issue. Hillary Clinton announced Monday that she is getting back into the political arena. The 2016 Democratic nominee said she is launching a new initiative called Onward Together, a political nonprofit that will help fund some of the organizations at the forefront of the progressive movement. The group, whose leadership includes former Vermont Governor Howard Dean, will encourage Democrats to get involved in politics and run for office. Clinton also tweeted, "This year hasn't been what I envisioned, but I know what I'm still fighting for, a kinder, big-hearted, inclusive America. Onward." And before we go to break, your moment of levity. Saturday Night Live could not let a turbulent week at the White House go by without poking fun. Both Alec Baldwin and Melissa McCarthy reprised their popular roles to take aim at President Trump and White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
Okay, sir, but back to James Comey. Your staff has been insisting all week that you didn't fire him because of his Russian investigation.
No, I did.
Wait, what?
I fired him because of Russia. I thought he's investigating Russia. I don't like that. I should fire him.
And you're just admitting that?
Uh-huh.
But that's obstruction of justice.
Sure, okay.
Wait, so did I get him? Is this all over? Oh, no, I didn't. Nothing matters. Absolutely nothing matters anymore. Fine.
That's right. Nothing's going to stop me because I've got the Republicans in the palm of my hand. Look at this.
You called for ice cream, sure? Here's 2 scoops.
Paul Ryan?
Yes, sir. I am so excited to be working with President Trump on an agenda that benefits...
Beat it, nerd. Just get the hell out of here, okay?
Whatever you say, Mr. Trump.
All right, let me just put this whole Russian thing to bed once and for all. Trump is innocent. How do we know? Because he told us so, period. Okay, then he hired lawyers to agree with him. And they're going to prove it with a certified letter, which you know is the truth because it costs an extra $2 to have it certified. And I got a tracking number right here if you want to check it out. And it goes 855-461-11856. Son of a... Oh, wait, that's my bank routing number. No one used that. Okay, no one used it. You can't take money out of it. You want to put money in, go ahead. Okay, next question.
Sean, you must know this Russia thing looks really bad.
Oh, my God. Okay, there's no Russian thing. The only Russian thing here is my little dollies. Bring them out.
Just be straight with us for once. What's really going on?
I am being straight with you. I'm telling you exactly what President Trump told me.
But what if he's lying to you?
But he wouldn't do that. He's my friend.
If he's your friend, why is everyone saying he's about to fire you and replace you with Sarah?
Oh, bless your heart. This is the first I'm hearing of that.
Get out. I gotta find Trump. I'm going to New York. The press interview is over.
That does it for this edition of Red and Blue. Tony DeCopel will see you here on Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern. More news after the break. You're watching CBSN.